All right, good evening, everyone. I've been told to get the proceedings started so we can go ahead and get the testimony rolling as soon as possible. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. I'm Michael Myers. I'm a senior counsel in the Environmental Protection Bureau of Attorney General Eric Schneiderman. And I'm pleased to be here today on behalf of the Environmental Protection Bureau on this hearing on the proposed repeal of the Clean Power Plan. The Attorney General's office has fought for national limits on carbon pollution from power plants for 15 years. And most recently, we've led a coalition of 18 states and 7 cities, including New York, defending the Clean Power Plan in court. We're here today or tonight at the New School because EPA, under Administrator Pruitt, has refused our request and that of many other states to hold a public hearing where our residents, who are on the front lines of climate change's increasingly devastating impacts, could be heard. And although EPA has apparently declined our invitation to hear your testimony directly, a transcript of today's testimony, as well as any written statements, will be sent to EPA for its consideration during the rulemaking. The Clean Power Plan is well grounded in the science and the law. In my brief remarks today, I wanted to quickly discuss one of the fundamental flaws in EPA's proposed repeal and also make some brief remarks about the importance of the Clean Power Plan. EPA told the DC Circuit Court last year that no serious effort to address the monumental problem of climate change can succeed without meaningfully limiting power plant CO2 emissions. Yet that is exactly the course EPA now proposes to take in repealing the Clean Power Plan without first replacing it with an equal or better rule. The law is clear. EPA has an obligation under the Clean Air Act to limit carbon pollution from power plants. Replacing something with nothing would violate the statute. That's why Attorney General Schneiderman has promised to sue EPA if they follow through with this repeal. The Clean Power Plan is the first nationwide limit on climate change pollution from existing power plants. And although the rule's requirements are modest, they add up to meaningful reductions because all states with fossil-fueled power plants must take steps to cut carbon pollution. We can and must do more to address climate change, including expediting a transition to renewable zero-carbon sources of energy. But the Clean Power Plan can serve as a cornerstone for those efforts. The Clean Power Plan's emission reductions are essential to help stem the increasing harms that all of us, especially our most vulnerable communities, face from climate change. For example, we've seen throughout New York more extreme rainfall events in which unprecedented amounts of rain has washed away roads and homes, causing loss of life and large-scale property damage. Storm damage is also worsened by sea level rise. This past October in New York, we marked the 5th anniversary of Hurricane Sandy, where sea level rise worsened the destruction the storm caused in our communities, including 2 million people left without power and 43 deaths. The sea level rise increased Sandy's related flooding by 25 square miles, resulting in damage to the homes of an additional 80,000 people in the city. And it's estimated that the cost of Sandy will likely reach $40 billion. And as our climate warms, it'll make it harder for New York to address the pervasive problem of smog, which triggers asthma attacks and even premature deaths. The science tells us that unless we significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions now, we can expect even worse harms in the future. And limiting carbon pollution from power plants also results in the reduction of other harmful pollutants, such as sulfur dioxide, nitrogen oxides, and mercury. That means fewer premature deaths, asthma attacks, and lost work days. Indeed, we've seen those benefits as a result of New York's participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative. In closing, Attorney General Schneiderman will continue to fight to limit harmful climate change. and this includes holding EPA to its legal obligation to require limits on carbon pollution from power plants that endangers New Yorkers. The Attorney General calls on EPA to abandon its misguided and dangerous efforts to repeal the Clean Power Plan. Thank you. I'm going to ask Assistant Commissioner from DEC, Jared Snyder, now to make some remarks.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jared Snyder. I'm a Deputy Commissioner at the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. We are the agency that would implement the Clean Power Plan in New York State. I'd like to start by thanking New York City and the Attorney General's office for hosting this meeting. And I want to thank you all for taking time out of your evenings to come here and provide input in this important process. New York strongly opposes EPA's attempt to roll back federal climate initiatives like the Clean Power Plan. The changing climate imperils all Americans in many ways, from the damage caused by rising sea levels and intense storms, to drought, extreme heat, the spread of disease vectors, and alteration of our natural habitat. Given these profound impacts, weakening any national emission reduction programs is misguided and irresponsible. Instead, it is essential that EPA maintain and strengthen existing emission reduction programs in order to continue progress towards the emission reductions that science tells us are needed to reduce the substantial risks to public health and safety that result from the changing climate. That is what we are doing in New York under Governor Cuomo's leadership. We are building a low-carbon electricity system powered by renewable energy and eliminating the use of coal, the highest emitting fuel. We have already reduced power sector emissions almost 50% since 2005, which is beyond the Clean Power Plan's target for 2030 for the nation. We have done this while creating jobs, reducing energy bills, and providing tremendous public health benefits valued in the billions of dollars. Now, one key program is the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, known as RGGI, which is a 9-state regional program that caps and reduces emissions from the power sector. By requiring power plants to buy emission allowances, it's raised over $1 billion for investment in clean energy in New York. At Governor Cuomo's direction, we reduced the emission cap in 2014 and have proposed a second round of further cap reductions, ensuring that by 2030, emissions will be 65% below 2005 levels. Given that kind of progress, it is inconceivable that the nation cannot achieve the Clean Power Plan's target of 32% reduction, half of what we are achieving in New York. New York's clean energy standard requires a nation-leading 50% renewable energy by 2030. We've set a nation-leading target of 2,400 megawatts of offshore wind power by 2030. And last week, Governor Cuomo announced additional nation-leading initiatives, including the nation's most ambitious goal to support energy storage, which allows carbon-free wind and solar power to be stored for use at peak times, reducing reliance on fossil fuel-fired power plants. And Governor Cuomo announced the zero-cost Solar for All program, which will provide cost-saving solar power to 10,000 low-income New Yorkers. All of these initiatives enable us to phase out high-emitting power plants. Only 2 plants in the state still burn coal, and as Governor Cuomo directed, DEC will issue regulations this year that will ensure the end of coal burning by 2020. And Governor Cuomo directed DEC to establish new limits on high-emitting peaking power plants and include those in RGGI for the first time. But as important as New York's climate leadership is, the leadership also shown by the City of New York and the Attorney General's office, and the leadership of other states, we are responsible for only a small fraction of U.S. emissions. and that's why we need national action as well. The Clean Power Plan is a common-sense initiative that enables residents of all states to follow the lead of New York State and reap the benefits of clean energy initiatives that reduce emissions, create jobs, and provide substantial public health benefits. In our view, it should be strengthened, not repealed. Thank you, and we look forward to your input.
My name is Jani Bhavishya, and I'm the director of the Mayor's Office of Recovery and Resiliency. And I just wanted to reiterate my colleagues' thanks for coming out tonight, taking time out of your evening to provide your perspective on this important issue. I am just going to go over the ground rules for tonight. Each person will have 3 minutes to speak, no more. We have instituted this time limit in order to be able to get through all the comments. So there is a timekeeper in the front row who will give you a 1-minute warning and then let you know when time is up. This hearing is on EPA's proposed repeal of the Clean Power Plan, so as such, all testimony should be directed to the EPA. At this hearing, we will not be taking any questions. We only receiving comments on the EPA's proposed repeal of the Clean Power Plan. The hearing will be recorded and transcribed. All transcribed testimony will be submitted to the EPA by January 16th. And as a reminder, please also be sure to submit your written comments through the formal EPA channels by the deadline. If you have not registered beforehand and would like to testify, please sign up at the registration desk, which is in the lobby just behind those doors. We will try our best to accommodate everyone. And with that, I would like to call up the first panel. Deborah Goldberg from Earth Justice, Andrew Moon from Sun Farmer, and Karthik Gummer from New York City Environmental Justice Alliance.
Good evening. I don't know if this is on. Is this on? Yes. Okay. Good evening. My name is Deborah Goldberg, and I'm the managing attorney of Earth Justice's Northeast Regional Office located here in Manhattan. I am also a longtime resident of New York. Earth Justice opposes the Environmental Protection Agency's misguided proposal to repeal the Clean Power Plan, our nation's first federal limits on carbon pollution from power plants. New Yorkers know all too well that we need to tackle climate change. 5 years ago, Superstorm Sandy inflicted immense damage on 8 countries and many U.S. states, including this city and region. Sandy was an unprecedented storm by several measures, and human-caused global warming worsened the impact. The result was $71.4 billion in damage, with 233 fatalities, including 158 in the United States. As bad as it was, Sandy is far from the only climate-driven disaster that has forced its way onto the front pages in recent years. Hurricanes, wildfires, and flooding all attest that climate disruption is a problem that will not solve itself. The lesson from these calamities is clear. If we are to avoid the worst future impacts of climate change, we need to take strong and decisive action now to cut the carbon emissions that are driving our global temperature upward and making extreme weather events the new norm. Doing so necessarily means tackling carbon from power plants. No other stationary sources emit more carbon. Nearly a third of U.S. total comes from power plants. The Clean Power Plan is a moderate, readily achievable blueprint for making meaningful cuts in those emissions, and it must not be repealed. Repeal of the Clean Power Plan would violate, not fulfill, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt's claimed intent to go back to basics and return to EPA's core mission. The Clean Air Act, one of our foundational public health and environmental laws, requires that EPA develop protections against harm from pollution, including harm to weather and climate. After considering the overwhelming evidence, EPA reasonably and responsibly concluded that carbon pollution threatens such harm. For its part, the Supreme Court has 3 times underscored EPA's obligation to protect against harmful carbon pollution. Indeed, citing the very Clean Air Act provision on which the Clean Power Plan rests, the court ruled that the act speaks directly to power plant carbon emissions. If the plan is repealed, EPA will abdicate its legal duty under the Clean Air Act and court precedent. Given the destruction and severity of extreme weather events and other climate-related impacts, we simply cannot afford more delay in addressing carbon pollution. Instead of repealing the Clean Power Plan, EPA should defend it vigorously.
Hello, good evening. My name's Andy Moon. I'll talk really fast because I wasn't planning to speak in just 3 minutes. I am an entrepreneur and CEO of Sun Farmer, which is a solar energy company. I've worked in the American private and nonprofit sectors for the last 12 years, and I'm here today to plead with the EPA and the current administration to preserve the 2015 Clean Power Plan. Here's why. First of all, renewable energy, not coal, will create jobs of the future. Fossil fuels are not the energy source of the future, and Americans know that. 2/3 of Americans support expanding renewable energy over fossil fuels. Coal will not be the employer of the future either. In 2017, the US coal industry employed about 160,000 people, while the US solar industry employed over 373,000 people, and the wind industry employed over 100,000 people. Repealing the Clean Power Plan will jeopardize American clean energy jobs, the main engine of job growth for the energy sector. Second, China will crush the United States in capitalizing on the renewable energy business opportunity, and will gain political leverage over the US as a world leader on environment. Renewable energy will power the world's future, and Chinese businesses have successfully capitalized on the business opportunity, and they've done it with significant support from the Chinese government. China already manufactures 2/3 of the world's solar panels and has installed a total of 77 gigawatts of solar, which is nearly double the amount of solar that the United States has. While the US considers doubling down on coal, China's president has pledged to invest $360 billion in renewable energy in the next 5 years, and that will create over 13 million new jobs. In my work in Asia and Africa through the nonprofit Sun Farmer, I increasingly see China exerting its influence. When I visited Ghana earlier this year, all of the local companies were looking to China rather than the US for solar equipment and for financing. A Chinese firm with government financing will build one of the largest solar plants in Nigeria, which is worth nearly $500 million US. Since World War II, countries around the world have looked to America for leadership. People want to work with American companies and use American innovations. It simply does not make sense for us to give up our world leadership role on environment to China, and it doesn't make financial sense to let China dominate the business opportunity for renewable energy. Third, the Clean Power Plan will have a significant positive financial impact. By the EPA's own analysis, before it was taken off the website, the Clean Power Plan will lead to climate and health benefits worth an estimated $55 to $93 billion per year in 2030. This includes avoiding 4,600 premature deaths and 145,000 asthma attacks in children each year. This far outweighs the cost of the plan, which is approximately $8 billion in 2030. So even if you don't agree with the scientific consensus that we need to take immediate and drastic action to avoid climate-related natural disasters, there's a compelling health and economic benefit. Finally, to close, change is hard. We need leadership from the government and the EPA. In the short term, there's always winners and losers. In times like these, we need leadership from our government to make sure that people like coal miners have a way to transition to new jobs. But as a business person, I strongly believe there'll be many more jobs in clean energy than there will be in coal, and making the transition will be a win-win for all Americans. As an American citizen, entrepreneur, on behalf of 1,000 business colleagues at Environmental Entrepreneurs, a nonprofit organization, I strongly request that we preserve the Clean Power Plan. It's the way of the future. Thank you.
And before we hear from our third panelist, can everyone hear me? Before we hear from our third panelist, I'd like to just call up the second panel so we can transition smoothly. Elizabeth Stein from the Environmental Defense Fund, Dan Sherrill from New York Renews, and Brett Thompson from Align.
Thank you. My name is Karthik Gummer, and I'm here to testify on behalf of the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance, or NEJA for short. NEJA is a nonprofit citywide alliance linking grassroots organizations from low-income neighborhoods and communities of color in their struggle for environmental justice. As champions of environmental justice advocacy, we would like to thank the Attorney General, New York City, and the New School for convening this people's hearing on the Clean Power Plan in light of the Trump administration's unwillingness to hold hearings accessible to New Yorkers and stakeholders across the Northeast of the United States. The environmental and climate justice movement has had deep concerns with the original Clean Power Plan. These concerns range from an over-reliance of schemes similar to cap and trade to recognizing certain types of waste incineration as compliant with emissions reductions goals. The Clean Power Plan's many shortcomings, voiced by frontline communities since it was originally proposed, are significant. However, we never advocated for a total repeal of the only federal policy that upholds our commitments to the Paris Agreement by requiring greenhouse gas reductions from power plants, one of our country's largest sources of emissions. According to a recent study whose simulations were reviewed by the U.S. Department of Energy's own national laboratories, a repeal of the Clean Power Plan would cost the national economy upwards of $600 billion and lead to an estimated 120,000 premature deaths. Since low-income communities and communities of color disproportionately live in close proximity to power plants and other polluting infrastructure, these deaths will unjustly be concentrated in the communities that our movement is committed to serving. It is about time that political leadership across the nation accounts for the decades of historic environmental burdens that have disproportionately harmed low-income communities and communities of color. Rather than a repeal of the Clean Power Plan, regulations must incorporate aggressive climate goals and ensure a just transition to a regenerative economy. While New York State would presumably reach CPP compliance due in part to a changing energy landscape, our participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, due in part also to our participation in the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, we must push for aggressive climate action that reflects the urgency of our collective crisis. To this regard, we would like to convey our gratitude to the Attorney General for supporting the statewide New York Renews Coalition since its inception and for formally supporting our coalition's innovative polluter fee, which provides a mechanism for our state to achieve a just transition and be a national leader in the fight for climate justice. While this president's administration would rather give handouts to dirty and dying industries like coal, the New York Renews polluter fee would generate about $7 billion annually to invest in transitioning to renewable energy, growing New York's economy, and uplifting communities statewide. For a quarter century, the New York City Environmental Justice Alliance has fought to support communities in their struggle for environmental justice. No matter the odds, we will continue this fight by advocating for aggressive and equitable climate action at all levels of government. We have taken this president to court before, and we will continue to challenge the violence of this administration's polluting agenda on all fronts. Thank you.
Go ahead. Okay. My name is Elizabeth Stein. I'm a fourth-generation New Yorker and an attorney at Environmental Defense Fund, a nonprofit and nonpartisan environmental organization headquartered in New York City with more than 166,000 members and activists in New York. I've lived in Harlem since 2005. 2 members of my household suffer from asthma, a condition that can be exacerbated by ozone and particulate matter pollution. My colleague, EDF attorney Ben Levitan of Kentucky, provided comments in the October 28, 2017 EPA public hearing in Charleston, West Virginia. Like him, I respectfully speak in support of the Clean Power Plan. In addition to yielding profound public health and environmental benefits for families and communities in all parts of the country, and improving the quality of life for millions of Americans, the Clean Power Plan will serve as an economic driver, powering the economy into a cleaner energy future that all other major industrialized nations recognize as essential to achieve. We are deeply concerned that EPA is proposing its harmful repeal of this protection without providing Americans across the country an adequate opportunity to present their views. I want to take this opportunity to thank New York Attorney General Eric Schneiderman and New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio for providing this much-needed opportunity for public comment concerning the proposed repeal of the Clean Power Plan. When EPA issued the Clean Power Plan in 2015, it estimated that the plan would create $52 billion in annual benefits. Subsequent analyses from NYU's Institute for Policy Integrity and also by MJ Bradley conclude the compliance with the Clean Power Plan has become dramatically cheaper as a result of the plummeting costs of clean energy. In late 2017, the Trump administration released the latest climate science special report. Its conclusion is stark. Climate change is accelerating, and the risks to America are growing more severe. Here in New York, we are seeing the kinds of events that become more intense and frequent with climate change with increasing frequency, most notably in the case of Hurricanes Irene and Sandy. Climate change also increases the frequency of extreme winter weather events, including major snowstorms. Of the 6 heaviest snowfalls ever recorded in New York City, half have occurred during the lifetime of my oldest child, who turns 15 today. Climate change may even contribute to extreme cold weather events of the type we've recently experienced, because a warming Arctic may weaken the jet stream, allowing polar air to penetrate further south than normal. EPA's proposed repeal of the Clean Power Plan would also harm people's health in communities downwind of highly polluting power plants, costing thousands of American lives and increasing the risk of asthma attacks, heart attacks, and other harmful health impacts for some of the most vulnerable Americans. New York City is a case in point. We are the only northeastern city that the American Lung Association has ranked among the most polluted for ozone. And air pollution from upwind power plants burning coal is a significant contributor to this dubious distinction. A recent study found that 2,700 annual premature deaths in the city could be tied to PM and ozone pollution. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak today in support of preserving the Clean Power Plan. And again, we urge EPA to retain the Clean Power Plan and to hold more hearings so that more Americans can share their views. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brett Thomason. I'm a climate organizer with Align, the Alliance for a Greater New York. We're a coalition of environmental justice and labor unions that have come together to address the climate crisis and the ways we can address it here in the city of New York. The EPA's decision to reverse the provisions of the previous administration's Clean Power Plan without any replacement is another example of the Trump administration's willingness to sacrifice the safety, health, and well-being of Americans for the short-term, narrow interests of industry. Repealing without the benefit of even hearing public testimony further exemplifies this callous disregard that the president and his surrounding administration have for the people they claim to represent. We want to thank this body for creating a forum where the public's voice can at least be heard. While not the only solution to the global climate crisis, the Clean Power Plan represents the only effort the federal government has made to address one of the largest sources of pollution in the United States, the emissions that come from fossil fuel burning generation plants. By forcing efficiency upgrades, alternative fuel use, or the additional use of renewable energy in the retail electricity sector, projections estimate that if implemented, these regulations would have reduced pollution from power plants by almost 32% below 2005 levels. The climate benefits from those reductions can't be understated, but more important to bear in mind are the thousands of lives lost to asthma attacks, heart attacks, and other sickness related to unsafe particulates in the air due to fossil fuel burning in our energy sector. These important regulations would have saved lives, would have saved time lost, and billions of dollars in public health expense. In light of the President and Secretary Pruitt's irresponsible repeal of this program, we here in the city and state of New York need to feel even more urgency around our own policies to address the climate crisis. Actions such as deploying renewable energy to progressively satisfy a greater share of New York's energy use each year, putting limits and fines on the amount that industries can pollute, and investing in transportation, energy, and efficiency infrastructure projects across the state are needed now more than ever. This should serve as a reminder and a wake-up call to our elected officials. Talk must lead to action, policies needs to be implemented and expanded, and New York needs to lead the fight on climate change, showing that it's feasible, affordable, and necessary. The time to act is now, and the repeal of the Clean Power Plan is a signal that we will get no help from the federal government for the foreseeable future. The Trump administration is devoted to the protection of profits for a narrow segment of coal producers and their major investors. This comes at the expense of the rest of us, particularly the most vulnerable, whether it's low-income communities of color living near polluting generation facilities, the sick and aging most susceptible to health issues, or the workers and families in coal country who are going to continue to see no benefits yielded from this repeal. In closing, Align thanks this body for providing this forum to echo what countless New Yorkers believe. Climate change is a persistent, worsening threat, and we demand bold action at every level of government to address it. We look forward to working towards solutions that will create clean air and a healthy environment, create thousands of good-paying clean energy jobs, and bring prosperity for future generations. Thank you for your time.
And before we hear from the last speaker on this panel, I'd like to announce the next panel: Marcia Annenberg from NYC 350, Jessica Ruff from Riverkeeper, and Lisa DiCaprio from the Sierra Club. Please be ready to come up as soon as this panel is over.
Great, thanks so much. My name is Dan Charella, and I'm the campaign coordinator for the New Yorker News Coalition. I want to begin with a wholehearted thanks to the Attorney General's office, to Eric Schneiderman and all of his staff for organizing this people's hearing and for hearing our voices even while the federal government chooses to deliberately ignore them. From leading the investigation into Exxon to endorsing a carbon tax for New York State, the Attorney General has shown time and time again that he understands the urgency of the climate crisis and is ready to take the kinds of bold stances that pave new ground in addressing the problem. As a young person looking at a lifetime of increasing temperatures and worsening storms, I'm sincerely grateful for the leadership. And frankly wish there were many more elected officials who are willing to take similarly bold stances. I'll keep my comments high level. The Clean Power Plan is a critical part of our country's climate and energy policy. By limiting emissions from existing power plants, the Clean Power Plan is a big win for both the environment and public health. If implemented, it would cut 730 million metric tons of carbon pollution from the atmosphere and radically reduce exposure to harmful air pollution, preventing thousands of premature deaths every year. But it's also worth noting and being candid about the fact that the Clean Power Plan is not and was never meant to be a silver bullet. If we're taking the scientific consensus seriously, then we know we must decarbonize our national economy at a faster rate than the CPP alone can accomplish. In other words, the Clean Power Plan is crucial, and it must also be treated as the absolute minimum that states should be doing on climate change. This is what's so insidious about the federal government's systematic dismantling of common sense climate policy, is that by rolling back even the bare minimum, they make the status quo seem heroic. But we can't let Washington lower the bar. They need to know that as New Yorkers, not only are we going to fulfill our obligations under the Clean Power Plan, but we understand we need to go well beyond them to protect our citizens and create thousands of new jobs in renewable energy. So as I mentioned, I am the coordinator of a broad coalition of labor, environmental, and community organizations called New York Renews. We're in Buffalo, we're in the Bronx, we're in Brentwood, all across the state. We're putting forward a bold vision to get New York to 100% renewables with equity and justice for frontline communities and workers, paid for by putting a fee on the corporate oil and gas companies that are polluting our atmosphere. And we're extremely grateful for the Attorney General in standing with us on that. But while here in New York we understand we should be holding fossil fuels financially accountable for their damages and using the revenue to usher in a Green New Deal, the federal government is planning to unleash those same companies on the public, free of all safeguards and flush with subsidies. This would be an attack on the American people and their livelihoods, and it's just extremely poor economic decision making. So on behalf of the New Yorker News Coalition and the 135 member organizations representing hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers, we urge the federal government to switch course, keep the Common Sense Clean Power Plan in place, and build on it from there. Thanks again to the Attorney General for hosting this hearing, and we look forward to continuing to fight the Trump rollbacks, but not only that, pursue a proactive vision for a truly equitable and sustainable economy. Thank you for your time.
Hello, I work with 350 New York City as an artist and an educator. 30 years ago, Dr. James Hansen, America's leading climate scientist, warned Congress that our ecosystems were imperiled from greenhouse gas emissions. 12 years ago, Al Gore warned the American public in his film, Inconvenient Truth, that we had a 10-year window to take action to avoid catastrophic climate change. Was this an exaggeration, or was this the truth? The answer would be yes to truth. If we look at the temperature records for the past 4 years, yes. If we look at the regular flooding of Miami during high tide, yes. If we look at the worst forest fires in California's history, yes. If you look at Hurricane Harvey pouring 60 inches of rain on the Houston area, yes. If you remember that we are standing in the epicenter of Hurricane Sandy in 2012, when water from the Hudson poured into our subways and stopped the furnaces from functioning at NYU's Langone Medical Center. In the public imagination, global warming is affecting a few polar bears looking for food in the Arctic, while they applaud new shipping lanes connecting Arctic continents. But what hasn't the public been told? They haven't been told that the melting glacial ice is changing the pattern of ocean circulation, which changes our climate. They haven't been told that melting permafrost in the Arctic contains both carbon dioxide and methane that will overwhelm the atmosphere with warming gases if the world continues to warm. They haven't been told that our warming oceans are killing the phytoplankton that supply 70% of the world's oxygen. So, as we contemplate the Clean Power Plan, the question is not, should we repeal it? The question is, does it go far enough to control dangerous emissions that are destroying our ecosystems? We didn't ask to be the generation that would determine the fate of our future, but without a doubt, it is our generation that has been given this mission. When our grandchildren look back on this time, will they wonder, how did we fail them so profoundly? Or will they look back in gratitude that we did everything in our power to protect them? At this point in time, the forces of denial and darkness are in charge of our federal government. We must work together to bring the light of science into our decisions to protect our children, our grandchildren, and the children to come. Thank you so much.
My name is Lisa DiCaprio. I am speaking on behalf of the Sierra Club Atlantic chapter. First, we would like to express our appreciation to Attorney General Eric Schneiderman for leading a coalition of 23 states, counties, and cities to defend the Clean Power Plan, and for organizing this people's hearing with Councilmember Costa Constantinides. The Sierra Club supports the Clean Power Plan as a way to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and facilitate the transition to a new green economy based on renewable forms of energy, onshore and offshore wind, solar power, and geothermal. In opposing this plan, the Trump administration denies the science of climate change and erroneously claims that the U.S. economy will benefit from eliminating environmental regulations and increasing our reliance on fossil fuels. This is not true for these 4 reasons. One, as has been stated, in 2007, the Supreme Court found that carbon dioxide emissions are a pollutant under the Clean Air Act, and that the EPA is required to outline and implement a plan to reduce these emissions. The Clean Power Plan, finalized by the EPA in August 2015, allows the states to determine how to achieve emission reduction targets. So the main point I think everyone is making is that this is not an option, but a requirement for the EPA. Secondly, every day we see new evidence of how climate change caused by human activity is threatening the habitability of our planet, not only for humans, but also for a multiplicity of animal and plant species in what is now being called the 6th Great Extinction. 3, climate change is now affecting all sectors of the U.S. economy, as documented in the most recent 2017 National Climate Assessment Report. The increasing costs of climate change are detailed in several recent studies, such as the October 2017 recently issued U.S. General Accounting Office. Similarly, Moody's Investors Service has announced that its credit ratings will now be influenced by how states and municipal governments address and implement measures to ameliorate climate change vulnerabilities, which represent extensive financial risks for investors. And the result of not addressing these climate change risks will be a downgrading of their bond ratings, which means that any kind of loans will be increasingly expensive. This means that even climate-denying governors and/or mayors will face the consequences of not addressing climate change. And as is becoming increasingly clear, the competitive economies of the 21st century will be those that transition in the most rapid and innovative ways to the new energy paradigm of energy conservation, efficiency, and renewable forms of energy. Finally, in defending the Clean Power Plan, we're also defending the EPA, as it is obvious that the Trump administration's opposition to this plan is part of a strategy to transform the EPA from an agency to protect the environment to an agency to protect the polluters who are destroying our environment. Thank you.
And I'd like to invite the fourth panel to be ready to come up as soon as we hear from our last speaker, Robert Caffin from the Adirondack Council, Margaret Berry from the Section of Environmental and Energy Law of the New York State Bar Association, and Danielle Gerard from Three Parks Independent Democrats.
Hi, I'm Jessica Ruff, the Director of Advocacy and Engagement at Riverkeeper, and also a fourth-generation Brooklynite. Riverkeeper, with 60,000 members, volunteers, and advocacy partners, is a member-supported watchdog organization whose mission includes safeguarding the environmental, recreational, and commercial integrity of the waters of the Hudson River, including the East River and the waterways of New York City. For 50 years, Riverkeeper has been working with communities, advocates, citizen scientists, businesses, and industries along New York City's waterways on a myriad of issues affecting the river, its watershed, and communities involved, giving us a unique perspective on issues of climate change, energy development, and resiliency. We thank you for this opportunity to testify. Riverkeeper fights every day for a clean, safe, and secure energy future, without which our precious drinking water supplies in the iconic Hudson River will never truly be protected. We oppose all new fossil fuel infrastructure projects. They're unnecessary and threaten the climate, the Hudson, and the communities where they are located and beyond. Dirty energy, among other things, contributes to sea level rise and storm surges, both of which directly threaten the Hudson River. We support and promote the enormous opportunities associated with energy efficiency and renewable power, and are working to close dangerous and unnecessary energy like the Indian Point nuclear power plant. This administration's attack on climate protections, from rolling back environmental and anti-pollution laws to withdrawing from the Paris Agreement to proposing to repeal the Clean Power Plan, is dangerous, short-sighted, and something we're committed to fighting against. And while there are some productive goals in this plan, we must also recognize that the CPP is flawed. CPP, through its failure to mandate renewables and energy efficiency in coal's stead, is by default still based on an energy system powered through natural gas and nuclear, and neither of these forms of energy are clean, safe, or environmentally feasible, nor are they sustainable or resilient. To be safe, sustainable, and resilient, and to protect the Hudson River, which provides drinking water to 100,000 people, millions more in times of drought, to combat the fossil fuel industry's relentless encroachment and the administration's actions, we need to invest in comprehensive energy efficiency programs throughout the state. And to make new fossil fuel infrastructure development obsolete. New York Independent System Operator finds that even after closing the 2,000 megawatt Indian Point nuclear plant, there'll be only 100 megawatts of power needed in 2021, most of which can be met through some generation, transmission, energy efficiency. And that generation must be provided by environmentally sound renewable energy built with real and transparent community involvement. There's no other way to cut our emissions and to reach our energy goals. And the demand for natural gas continues to decline so steeply that there are threats of a, quote, gas apocalypse, given that every month there's been a decline over the past, since 2016. Repeated changes, and this will lead to fire sales of plants, and the repeated changes of plant ownership means we need strong controls moving forward while we work to make them obsolete. CPP is important because it does limit emissions from coal-fired plants, and it is important to fighting climate change and protecting communities, water, and air. As these policies move us away from coal, CPP makes room for its replacement. The key is it must be paired with legislation and regulations that make those replacements safe, clean, community-powered, renewable energy and energy efficiency. Legislations and regulations are complicated and almost always flawed. CPP does not give us all the answers, it's just a tool. We need to work to make it the most efficient tool that it can be, and we need to and it puts the power in the hands of the states, which is now exponentially more important. We're counting on the Attorney General as well as the New York State government to do the best work it can to accomplish these goals with or without the Clean Power Plan. We need energy efficiency yesterday. Rhode Island and Massachusetts are already beating us. We need renewable energy and storage developed in conjunction with communities, particularly low-income and communities of color, and not just promises. This must be New York's priority to protect our water, our communities, and the Hudson River. Hopefully it will be done with the CPP. Thank you so much.
No, 3 minutes, change the rules. 3 minutes. Thank you to Attorney General Eric Schneiderman and the other government agencies for providing this forum to enable the public to comment on the U.S. EPA's illegal and unreasonable proposal to repeal the regulations known as the Clean Power Plan. My name is Robert Kafin. I am chairman of the board of directors of the Adirondack Council. The council is a privately funded, not-for-profit organization dedicated to ensuring the ecological integrity and wild character of New York's magnificent environmental Adirondack Park. The Adirondack Park is a 6 million acre preserve of public and private lands, comprising the largest park in the contiguous United States. The park safeguards the largest intact temperate deciduous forest on Earth. It contains more than 90% of all of the ancient never-logged forests and 90% of the motor-free wilderness in the Northeast. It is a national treasure. The park's future is endangered by a rapidly warming global climate. Climate change has already shown some of its harmful effects in the park in the form of severe storms, flooding, and extreme swings in temperature. Long-term climate change threatens the character and vitality of the park. The federal Clean Power Plan was an outstanding opportunity to reduce greenhouse gases across the United States in a fair, effective, and affordable manner. Implementation of the plan would also have brought substantial side benefits in terms of reductions in other air pollutants, including those that cause acid rain and smog that also harm the Adirondack Park. Congress has been unable to address the challenges of climate change through new comprehensive legislation. Thus, the U.S. EPA needed to use its existing authority under the Clean Air Act to issue regulations to protect public health and the environment from the uncontrolled emissions of greenhouse gases from a variety of sources of air pollution. The Clean Power Plan was part of that effort. The repeal of the Clean Power Plan would leave the United States with no formal program to address the contribution to climate change from large fossil-fueled power plants, despite the clear scientific evidence that climate change is harming to people, communities, and natural resources. This harm is especially evident in New York, where the effects will be felt from the seacoast to the mile-high summit of Mount Marcy in the Adirondack Park. If it repeals the Clean Power Plan, EPA will be failing to observe its legal obligation to regulate greenhouse gases from electric utility generating units. The United States Supreme Court has already upheld an EPA ruling declaring that greenhouse gas emissions endanger public health. This placed a burden on EPA to enact standards and guidelines for existing sources of air pollution, such as massive fossil-fired power plants that contribute huge quantities of carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. New York has been a leader over the years in forcing the federal government to do things that it didn't want to do under the Clean Air Act amendments of 1990 and its predecessor, Clean Air Act. If EPA repeals the Clean Power Plan, we're repeating the same mistakes made by prior administrations that failed to adhere to the requirements of the Clean Air Act as passed by Congress and signed into law by prior presidents. We are sure that Attorney General Eric Schneiderman, on behalf of our state, will have to sue power plants whose emissions are harming the people, infrastructure, and natural resources if EPA does not uphold the Clean Power Plan. Let me close by saying that the Clean Power Plan should not be repealed. To do so would be violating the Clean Air Act. To do so would be a repudiation of sound science. To do so would reflect the failure to use proper economic analytic tools and underestimate the true costs of carbon dioxide emissions. To do so would be a blow to the health of millions of Americans. To do so would permit the continued vandalism of the natural resources of the Adirondack Park by unregulated polluters and the unraveling of its winter recreation-based economy. I urge the EPA to withdraw its proposal to repeal the Clean Power Plan, to defend it in court, and to fully implement it. Thank you.
My name is Danielle Gerard. I am first vice president of Three Parks Independent Democrats, an Upper West Side political club covering the area roughly from 96th Street to 106th Street, from Central Park West to Riverside Drive. I'd like to thank Attorney General Schneiderman, our former state senator, for holding these hearings today and for all he is doing to stand up to the current administration's debasement of democracy. Climate change is an emergency. The EPA should act like it. Preserving the Clean Power Plan is a good place to start. At the time the Clean Power Plan was introduced, Three Parks did not think it went far enough. It was too reliant on the oil and gas industry and too favorable to nuclear power. As early members of the successful movement to ban fracking in New York State in 2014, Three Parks is adamantly opposed to continued reliance on fossil fuels. As opponents of the continued operation of the Indian Point nuclear power plant in Westchester County, we worked for years to close the reactors. Both of these campaigns involved generating thousands of petition signatures and hundreds of calls to our elected officials. In the face of the ignorant and shameless determining United States policy today, the corporate toadies, those who utterly ignore science, reason, humanity, and economic and social justice across the board in favor of their corporate masters, the Clean Power Plan represents a commitment to combating climate change, putting people's health ahead of corporate profits, and creating jobs in clean energy. We should build on it to ramp up wind and solar power production under the provisions for substituting renewable sources for fossil fuel-powered generation. Why can't New York build wind turbines for distribution around the United States? Why can't we be the state that does the same for solar panels? Why shouldn't we be the state that sets the standard for conservation measures which can save 20% of the energy we use? We can do this under the Clean Power Plan. And we still can if Attorney General Schneiderman and those he is working with continue to fight back to do the job that the federal government was designed to do. Republicans are rolling back environmental regulations as fast as they can. We have to stop their momentum in every possible way. We can all be part of standing up to the thoughtless and selfish who are causing severe harm to our country every day they remain in power. Preserving the Clean Power Plan is a good place to start.
I'd like to invite our fifth panel to come up as soon as we hear from our last speaker, Jerry Rivers, North American Climate Conservation and Environment, Malia Brown, Organizing for Action, and Elizabeth Soto, Young Evangelicals for Climate Action.
Thank you to the Office of the Attorney General, the Office of the Mayor, and other co-sponsors for this opportunity to provide comments on EPA's proposed repeal of the Clean Power Plan. My name is Margaret Berry, and I am providing these comments today on behalf of the New York State Bar Association Environmental and Energy Law Section. The section has also submitted written comments to EPA. This testimony and the written comments reflect the opinions of this section and do not represent those of the New York State Bar Association unless and until they have been adopted by its House of Delegates or Executive Committee. The section has urged EPA not to finalize the proposed repeal unless and until it devises an equally effective alternative plan for reducing greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants. Existing power plants are the largest domestic stationary source of carbon dioxide emissions. If the proposed repeal is finalized, it would leave greenhouse gas emissions from these facilities unregulated for an indefinite period of time. Repeal of the Clean Power Plan without an adequate substitute plan is unacceptable and unlawful. EPA's proposed repeal would simply push the decision of how, or even whether, to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants down the road. This deferral of action contravenes EPA's statutory obligations under the Clean Air Act. Moreover, as the Climate Science Special Report published in November by the U.S. Global Change Research Program makes clear, the United States cannot afford delays in the mitigation of greenhouse gas emissions. The report provided an alarming compendium of the physical impacts that our historical emissions are already having, and of the environmental havoc that is projected in the absence of prompt and effective measures to reduce emissions. Physical impacts, however, are only part of the story. They will necessarily lead to social and economic impacts as well. These threats were well documented in the U.S. Global Change Research Program's third National Climate Assessment in 2014. Most relevant to our comments today, however, is EPA's 2009 endangerment finding, which was crystal clear in documenting the substantial risk greenhouse gas emissions pose to public health and welfare. Having issued the endangerment finding, EPA has an affirmative, non-discretionary obligation to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from power plants. The Clean Air Act imposes a mandate that EPA may not neglect so long as the endangerment finding remains in effect. EPA recently issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking seeking information about a potential future rulemaking to regulate greenhouse gas emissions from existing power plants. However, as the Climate Science Special Report emphasized, substantial emissions reductions in the near term are essential to any realistic plan for keeping the increase in global average temperature below 2 degrees Celsius. The Clean Power Plan should not be repealed unless EPA is prepared to move forward with a proposal for an equally effective substitute plan. Thank you.
This administration, with the goal of decreasing carbon pollution in the U.S., protecting health and investing in new sources of clean energy. Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Scott Pruitt stated that the CPP needs to be repealed because the Obama administration overstepped its power when the plan was immediated. But Pruitt is determined to keep America dependent on harmful fossil fuels. The Clean Power Plan leads to a healthier citizens and continues to effort to combat climate change. According to research by the Trump administration, the CPP would prevent 45,000 permanent deaths each year by 2030. It would also reduce asthma attacks on other respiratory disease. Repealing the CPP would lead to sickness and early deaths and have a disastrous effect on the environment. It would also cut thousands of jobs from the quickly growing clean energy sector. Climate change is also opposed to a threat to our planet, a threat to our security, our public health, our world economy, agriculture, and our society. Now is the time to support critical climate change safeguards, but build a clean energy economy that works for everyone to protect our human health and the dignity of all of God's creation. The Clean Power Plan seeks to reduce pollution from the United States' largest sources of power by 32% by 2030. EPA's own estimate the CPP could prevent a projection 500 to 36,000 permanent deaths, 90,000 asthma attacks in children, up to 17,000 heart attacks and 17,000 hospital admissions. I share the disappointment in the EPA's intention to repeal the CPP as it risks damage to our air, our water, our soil, and most important, our people, particularly the poor and the valuable. My last words is, let's keep our planet healthy so our children could have a healthy planet which has a clean air, a clean water to drink, and rich soils to provide food for our food sources. Thank you.
I would like to begin by thanking the offices of Attorney General Eric Schneiderman and the New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio for organizing this hearing, and the New School for hosting. My name is Malia Brown. As the New York State Climate Lead for Organizing for Action and a charter member of the Climate Reality Project, I have spent a significant amount of time discussing the need to reduce carbon dioxide emissions with the residents of New York State. I testify today not as a scientist or policy expert, but as a community organizer and environmental advocate eager to continue the conversation on how best to keep our air and water clean. And let me be clear, I strongly oppose the Environmental Protection Agency's move to repeal the Clean Power Plan. Nearly 5 years ago, when former President Barack Obama directed the EPA to create nationwide limits on carbon pollution from power plants, I began gathering signatures in support of the plan. In the years following, I committed to speaking engagements, panel discussions, and moderated Q&As throughout the neighborhoods of New York City. Community outreach has made it clear to me that New Yorkers support regulations that reduce carbon pollution and protect our environment. Young people, especially, are enthusiastic about laying the framework for a more sustainable future. New Yorkers accept the overwhelming scientific evidence that says carbon dioxide emissions contribute to a changing climate, and we have seen the effects of these changes firsthand. I was one of many people who volunteered to clean up debris after Hurricane Sandy. I was not qualified, but I was available. There is an urgency to dealing with these disasters, and we are vulnerable to more extreme weather that will surely come. New Yorkers recognize the connection between a changing climate and the health and safety of our families, and we expect our government officials and federal agencies to make decisions with our best interests in mind. The EPA has a responsibility to reduce carbon pollution, which is why the move to repeal the Clean Power Plan without a replacement is misguided and dangerous. There is no evidence to show that this decision will have a negative impact, no negative impact on our environment. Furthermore, there have not been sufficient hearings to ensure that the voices of diverse people are heard. EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt and the Trump administration say that a repeal of the Clean Power Plan will be cost-effective and good for our economy. But there is little incentive to invest in coal, and no profit is worth degrading the air that we breathe. The fate of future generations should not be casualty to an already dying industry. I worry about what kind of world we will leave for our children, and I wonder if we will condemn them to an unlivable planet. But I hope that we will rely on human ingenuity and transition from dirty fossil fuels to renewable energy like solar and wind. The Clean Power Plan accelerates that transition, and I ask that the EPA reconsider its repeal. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Soto. I'm here on behalf of the Young Evangelicals for Climate Action, a national group that organizes young evangelicals in the U.S. coming together and taking action to overcome the climate crisis as part of their Christian discipleship and witness, as well as on behalf of C4, Christians Concerned About Climate Change, a local meetup and movement that started here in NYC at Redeemer Presbyterian Church. I stand before you and against the EPA's actions today because of the moral imperative that is protecting the Clean Power Plan, our nation's most
most comprehensive and ambitious plan for addressing carbon emissions. More importantly, I stand before you because of the call I've been given, a call to live as Christ lived, if I am to say that I know him. This means caring not just for my neighbor, but also the least of these, whom Jesus identifies as the poor, the oppressed, and those in need, the very demographic and population most at risk for being impacted by climate change, not only in New York City and the US, but all over the world. Today, we are witnessing the effects of climate change and the consequences of fossil fuel usage all around us. Our oceans are becoming more acidic and our weather more unpredictable. More frequent and severe wildfires and hurricanes, hunger and the contamination of water, job loss, and billions of dollars in climate change economic loss is just a taste of the effects of climate change and a worsening reality that awaits us if we do not change course. Yet at a time when the UN has declared to the world that we have only 3 years to prevent the most dangerous effects of climate change, the APA has been working to systematically dismantle every fighting chance we have for a better future, not just for my generation, but for generations to come. The Clean Power Plan is one of the few barriers that stop power plants from dumping unlimited amounts of carbon pollution into the atmosphere. Yet this plan, along with 60 other environmental regulations, are being done away with without a second thought by the APA and the leaders behind it. As a 28-year-old woman with dreams of having a family of my own, I cannot express the degree to which it pains me that I may not be able to secure the basic necessities of the children I hope to have. What will I tell them when they ask me why these problems weren't prevented? What will I say to them when they ask why their safety and well-being was carelessly forgotten? The answer is, I have no answer. There is no good reason for scrapping the Clean Power Plan, not when clean energy jobs outnumber fossil fuel jobs by more than 2.5 to 1. There is no good reason when solar and wind industries are creating jobs at a rate 12 to 17 times faster than that of the rest of the US economy, or when companies like Eastern Kentucky are building solar farms in place of coal mines and creating jobs for displaced coal miners. There is no good reason when, for the first time, solar and wind energy is cheaper than fossil fuel energy. Enough is enough. There was once a man hated by the government, hated by his own people, and hated by the world. He walked on this earth condemning those in power for their hypocrisy, greed, and sin, humbling them through his weakness, sacrifice, and love. And he looked into the eyes of the vulnerable and suffering and told them, "You matter." As Dr. Martin Luther King once said, "Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about the things that matter." To all of you in this room, whether Christian, Muslim, Jewish, or not affiliated with any faith, we have something to stand and fight for, a hope of a better future. I thank you for being here and for making your voice heard against this appalling and unmerited revocation of the Clean Power Plan. To the EPA, to Scott Pruitt, and everyone behind his actions, we stand in solidarity today, united that the Clean Power Plan matters. Climate change matters, our future matters, and our children's future matters. On behalf of YECA, C4, and the thousands of Christians that do care about climate action in this country, I thank you.
I'd like to invite our next panel to come up, Natalie Cronin, Charles Davenport from Stop Cricket Valley Energy, and Susie Winkler.
Hi, thank you. My name is Natalie Cronin. I am a child care provider here in New York City, and my reasons for being here began at 8 years old. I grew up in Western Pennsylvania, and at that time, I began to question why our creek was polluted and why it was allowed to be polluted. The waterfalls and the cliffs and even the turtles were bright orange. And I came to learn that everyone in our world was tied to coal and that we were expected to accept this as part of our bread and butter. Today, 30 years later, I'm the mommy raising my children in a city that boasts about its water. We've learned so much in that time about the effects of smog, soot, mercury on our health, on our well-being. We've learned about the climate disruption of carbon and methane. and the ugly, disastrous processes involved from fracking farmland and chopping up mountains and drilling spills in the oceans. But our leadership has systematically ignored these facts and continues to coddle polluters. This industry has been guilty of human rights abuse since the times of 16 tons and what do you get, and Esau's script. Today, industry bullies and sues and intimidates and silences victims that are hurt by their processes. It infuriates me as a voter and a consumer that we have been restrained as innovators and creators as Americans. To bring our nation into the future, we cannot shop our way out of this issue as parents. We need to instead raise our voices in support of this very imperfect plan. We refuse to be encumbered by the past and robbed of our future alongside our children. I'm very, very grateful for this opportunity to speak today for my family and my fellow human beings and New Yorkers. Thank you.
Charles Davenport, Wappingers Falls, New York. There are 2 natural gas-powered electric generating plants under construction here in New York State today. One is the 650 megawatt Competitive Power Ventures plant near Middletown, New York. The other is the 1,100 megawatt plant in Dover Plains, New York, Cricket Valley Energy. There are those who say that the global warming effects of the carbon dioxide and methane emissions connected with these 2 plants alone will put New York City underwater. But I don't want to discuss hypocrisy in global warming today. I want to talk about hypocrisy and the lives of children. Governor Cuomo and Attorney General Schneiderman are suing the EPA to protect New Yorkers from air pollution coming from other states. Schneiderman says millions upon millions of New Yorkers are still breathing unhealthy air due to smog pollution, a huge amount which is blowing into New York from upwind states. Cuomo says exposure to smog is also linked to premature death. Some groups, including children, the elderly, and those with existing lung diseases, such as asthma, are at especially heightened risk from smog pollution. Meanwhile, up in Dover Plains, New York, the 1,100 megawatt Cricket Valley Energy plant is under construction. The DEC said before approving the project, this project will be a major source of NOx and VOC, both precursors to ozone. These chemicals contribute to the formation of smog, smog being the stated reason for Cuomo's and Schneiderman's lawsuit. Meanwhile, incredibly, Dover Plains High School, Middle School complex is within 3/4 of a mile of this plant. The Wingdale Elementary School is 2 miles away. That's 1,100 vulnerable children within 2 miles of this plant. Do Cuomo and Schneiderman want us to believe that hundreds of tons of poisons can be released into the air and not harm nearby children? But pollution coming from Michigan, Illinois, geez, that's a dire and horrific health hazard. Give us a break. What about protecting the children of Dover Plains from Cricket Valley pollution? And why are we doing this? It's not because we need more electric power. The previously mentioned New York Independent System Operator report that says that we need an additional 600 megawatts of power by 2027. This modest need, they say, can be met by combinations of solutions, including generation, transmission, energy efficiency, and demand response measures. Our free market says, hey, if a shortage or threatened shortage of a commodity exists, the price of that commodity will go up. That's not happening in the electricity market. The price of electricity is so low that nuclear generating plants in upstate New York need a $7.6 billion taxpayer subsidy to stay in operation. These generating plants, the old ones and the new ones, are being constructed and kept running, not because of any need for electricity, but for the sake of politics, that's tax base and jobs, and to provide independent investment opportunities. And I can't say who the investors are, but many are foreigners, and I suspect that much money comes from the Cayman Islands and Swiss bank accounts. So, Mr. Attorney General, Mr. Governor, we don't want more methane-powered plants that contribute to global warming and that poison our children. Be true environmental leaders. Stop the construction and operation of the competitive power venture plant and the Cricket Valley energy generating plant. Thank you.
So just before we move on, I'd like to identify panel 7 to prepare. Panel 7 will be Gary Keir, Christy Colaprico, and Michael Aronson. Thank you.
That's a good act to follow. Susie Winkler, I'm from Burlington Flats, New York. That's 4 hours from here. I am representing my grassroots group, People Not Pipelines. In 2014, Food and Water Watch slammed the proposed clean power plant, saying it was incentivizing fracking. The plan, with its reliance on cap and trade schemes and state market solutions, along with woefully unambitious climate goals, carbon goals, far from did what it needed to do to change fracking and natural gas in the state of New York. Food and Water Watch had that right, though soon after the plan was degraded even further. Now, more than 3 years later, 8 attorneys general are fighting for what is a dangerous and losing plan. Many big environmental organizations are clamoring to preserve CPP, but are silent on the sort of frack gas infrastructure that the plan actually calls for, which includes the Cricket Valley and the CPV frack gas power plants and all the pipelines that support them. Our environmental movement has neither the time nor the money on our side. The deep pockets of the political right and industry have tipped the scales against our efforts. The climate crisis is real, and the wolf is at the door, guys. If Constitution Pipeline taught me anything, it's that one should pick one's battles wisely. So I ask tonight, why choose a losing battle that distracts from a far more critical fight? Not only is the Clean Power Plan too weak, as Mark Jacobson says, but as Cornell's Dr. Robert Howarth has stressed, it promotes frack gas as a replacement for coal and oil. When methane leakage is added to CO2 from combustion, fracked gas heats the planet faster. How is it possible that a terrible plan based on erroneous leakage numbers and designed to allow gas corporations to continue business as usual is being elevated by this lawsuit? Had a Republican administration crafted this CPP plan, it would have been trounced by the Democrats as unacceptable. Posturing against Trump for this plan is a waste of our precious time and limited financial resources. It sidetracks us and keeps us from the work that's most needed. Our movement is being co-opted to promote a methane-induced climate catastrophe. The answer is not to implement the CPP on a state level. Rather, let each state seek a way forward that works around the obstacle that's the federal government. But on a state level, we're not doing what's needed either. All 8 AGs who are currently suing the EPA should work with laser focus to get their own houses in order. What can each state accomplish without Washington's approval? That's the question. Governor Cuomo should start with bold and brave action that is absolutely within his authority by rescinding the air permits for the CPV and the CVE gas-fired power plants. And for goodness sakes, don't build a 16-megawatt gas-fired power plant downtown in Albany that will lock the capital of New York and the state that banned fracking. This plan will continue to disproportionately expose people in Albany's environmental justice community of Sheridan Hollow to far more than their share of the pollution. Given the very real crisis in both government and climate, I call on Governor Cuomo and AG Schneiderman to accept this challenge and choose aggressive, positive action above political theater. We need an energy plan that incentivizes the immediate implementation of a renewable energy infrastructure, not the fracking of our nation.
So panel seven is Gary Kerr, Christy Colaprico, and Michael Aronson. I apologize if I misspoke any of your names.
Hello, my name is Gary Keir. I'm from a small company called Carbon Xprint. When one door closes, another one opens. There's more than one way to accomplish what we want to accomplish. This may be an opportunity. We can have a workaround for the Clean Power Plan. Please consider the following points. The cost of solar and wind energy is on parity with fossil fuels and continues to decline. The cost of energy storage continues to decline. Energy efficiency standards such as Passive House already pay for themselves. The more we invest, the experience curve demonstrate that these technologies will get even cheaper. The IEA estimates that we need $44 trillion of green investment in renewable energy, storage, efficiency, and infrastructure to avoid the catastrophic effects of climate change. The return on that investment is estimated to be $115 trillion. The demand for green investment currently outstrips the supply, according to the Carbon Bonds Initiative. In the end, with or without regulation, it all comes down to money. The U.S. and New York in particular is the financial center of the world. We can use investment as a tool to solve this problem. Institutions, companies, and individual investors want to do something about climate change, but they simply lack the opportunity. They want to do the right thing, but they also want to measure how they are doing. There is a need to demonstrate quantifiable responsibility to shareholders, customers, and constituents. Think of our own opportunity, our lack of opportunity we have to do something constructive about climate change. When people have skin in the game, they pay more attention to the goal. What gets measured gets managed, what gets measured gets done. A generally accepted price of carbon is $40 a ton. Governments can give institutions, companies, and individual investors an opportunity to act on climate change by ensuring or creating more green bonds. By pricing a green bond unit at $40 a ton, each $40 unit can be used by institutions, companies, and individual investors to measurably balance 1 ton of the carbon footprint of their stock portfolio or their energy usage. This method is called Carbon Xprint. As a reference, a $100,000 investment in a Vanguard 500 S&P 500 index fund has a 15-ton carbon footprint. This free market method is measurable and profitable. It can be a viable addition to or an alternative to regulation, carbon trading, or carbon tax. Positive feedback approach can attract a greater number of supporters to climate action and disarm some of its critics. Thank you very much.
Hello, my name is Christy Colaprico. I've never delivered a testimony before, and I hate public speaking, but this proposed repeal let me know that I needed to speak up. I'm not a government official or a scientist. I'm just your average concerned citizen who loves this country and planet and who doesn't understand how the Environmental Protection Agency could make a decision that does the exact opposite of protecting the environment. I'm here to testify and to urge the EPA to reconsider their proposed repeal of the Clean Power Plan. Our government is supposed to be a government for the people, but the proposed repeal puts our health, our lives, and our futures at risk in favor of fossil fuel interests. As a resident of New York City, I'm no stranger to air pollution. I don't understand why anyone wouldn't want to make cleaner air a reality. The recent regulatory impact analysis done by the EPA in October of this year even supports the notion that the Clean Power Plan could prevent 4,500 premature deaths per year by 2030. This projection by the current administration is even higher than the 3,600 projected by the Obama administration. Other projected health benefits of the plan include, but are not limited to, less asthma attacks in children, less heart attacks per year, and less hospital visits per year. Your own research proves that the Clean Power Plan is good for the people of the United States. Now let's talk climate change. Though there's still a tremendous amount of work that needs to be done, we've made enormous strides in recent years to cut down on CO2 emissions from power plants. In 2016, for the first time in almost 40 years, they were no longer the leading source of CO2 emissions. We can't afford to regress. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration announced just yesterday that 2017 was the costliest year ever for U.S. weather disasters at $306 billion, $100 billion more than the previous record. We endured 16 separate climate disasters in the U.S. in 2017, and 362 people lost their lives as a result. For the third consecutive year, every state across the continental U.S. was warmer than average, 5 of which experienced their warmest year on record. Having another year like 2017 would be disastrous to our economy, not to mention the havoc and heartbreak these catastrophes cause the citizens of this country. If we don't make serious changes now, we can be sure that natural disasters will not only keep coming, they'll get worse. While countries like Iceland and Sweden, to name a few, are making incredible strides in the renewable energy game, we're stuck with an administration with a 20th century mindset. Our president is supposed to be the leader of the free world, but how can we be free when we are so chained to an antiquated power system that relies on burning fossil fuel? How can we consider ourselves world leaders when we are pulling back in our commitment towards clean energy? Science has repeatedly proven to us that sea levels are rising, that droughts and rising temperatures are leading to more extreme storms and wildfires. Climate change is real. It's not a debate. The only debate is if you, Mr. Pruitt, are going to put your people, who are all environmental stakeholders and do not deserve to live on a planet burdened by pollution, ahead of your corporate interests. Thank you to Attorney General Schneiderman and everyone else here who let just an ordinary citizen like me make a comment.
Thank you. Just before we move to the final member of this panel, I'd like to identify the last panel to prepare. We'll have Cecil Corbin-Mark, Emily Mart, and Paul Rio.
My name is Mike Aronson. First, I'd like to thank Attorney General Schneiderman, Mayor de Blasio, and the sponsoring environmental organizations. I'm here today to testify against the repeal of the Clean Power Plan. The fact is, carbon emission is a dire hazard to our health and our climate. The Clean Power Plan addresses this issue by setting carbon emission limits, and each state has individualized goals. And states have the autonomy to achieve these goals in any way that works best for them. In doing so, states spur innovation, generate new jobs, all while protecting our health, climate, and future. This is the type of tomorrow we should invest in, not a tomorrow that is environmentally, technologically, and socially regressive. Administrator Pruitt and President Trump continue to perpetuate the false argument that the Clean Power Plan and environmental protections like it are killing jobs and the economy. According to the Department of Energy Employment and Energy Report, 2.2 million Americans work in full or in part in energy efficiency products and or services. And 133,000 jobs in this sector were added in 2016 alone. Other numbers are over 100,000 employees in wind, which is a 32% increase from 2015. And over 350,000 people work in whole or in part in solar. These numbers speak for themselves. Renewables, energy efficiency are growing the economy and generating jobs. Administrator, you have access to the same numbers as I do. Your repeal is not going to help the economy. It's not going to create jobs. So then I ask, what do you hope to accomplish by repealing the Clean Power Plan? Any short-term arguments for this repeal are vastly outweighed by the immediate and long-term consequences to our health, environment, and future. As climate change and pollution is not limited to being purely an environmental issue. It's a public health issue, it's a human rights issue, it's a social justice issue, an economic issue, and it's an issue that poses an immediate and long-term threat to each and every one of us. With that said, make no mistake, a blue wave is coming, and it grows stronger by the day. So should you so choose to repeal the Clean Power Plan, you will only fuel our resolve. As we are not going to stand idle, we will not be silent, and we will not falter. Instead, we will be united, we will be loud, we will resist, and in the end, we will prevail. And with that said, I want everyone in this room to send a message to Trump and Pruitt. Who here is going to sign up with one of these amazing environmental organizations and get involved? Come on, I want to hear some cheers. Who here is going to get involved? Come on, guys, I want to hear some cheers. Awesome, awesome. Thank you again to the Mayor's office. Thank you, Attorney General Schneiderman. I yield the remainder of my time.
And for our final panel, again, we'll have Cecil Corbin Mark, Emily Mart, and Paul Reel. Paul, would you like to go first?
I'd be happy to. All right. Am I on? Testing. I'm on. I'm Paul Reale. I'm the Director of Building Operations Research with CUNY's Building Performance Laboratory. Most arguments to repeal the Clean Power Plan center on either the loss of jobs or the sheer folly in it because man-made climate change does not exist. Neither of these arguments is remotely valid. Regarding climate change denial, I will not waste your precious time even dignifying that argument with a response. Instead, I turn your attention to the purported jobs that would disappear as a consequence of the Clean Power Plan going into effect. In fact, the opposite is true to dramatic effect. This quote from a report based on U.S. Department of Energy data, quote, "Clean electricity jobs are no doubt the engine that drives America's electric energy economy, outstripping the number of paychecks provided by the fossil fuel industry by at least 5 to 1. What drives that job creation? Enacting and enforcing the Clean Power Plan would require reductions in power plant emissions from burning fossil fuels. There are two fundamental ways to realize those reductions. The first way is by shifting our electricity sources away from fossil fuels to carbon-free sources of energy, such as wind and solar. Designing, installing, operating, maintaining renewable energy systems takes tremendous human capital, jobs, and yet the energy cost is competitive with fossil fuel-based energy. The second way to reduce emissions is by slowing the growth of energy consumption through energy conservation and efficiency. This may seem like an aside, but let me be clear. Of the many approaches to decarbonize the electric grid, energy efficiency far outshines all others in terms of cost, environmental impact, policy alignment, grid capacity, and grid reliability. And with nearly 50% of all the energy in the United States being consumed in industrial, commercial, and residential buildings, energy efficiency in buildings is a rich area for job growth. One significant example market is New York City. Its buildings fall into 3 eras: pre-war, post-war, and modern. And we are now on the precipice of the eco era of building construction. Some new buildings consume 80 to 90% less energy than conventional buildings, and somewhat counterintuitively are significantly more comfortable than their older counterparts. The jobs associated with these building types will be assumed by those already in design and construction, though these workers are acquiring new knowledge and new skills. However, 6 million commercial buildings and 126 million households already exist in the United States. The vast majority of these buildings can undergo retrofits that can, on average, reduce their energy consumption by well more than half. Until that happens, the simple path to energy efficiency in buildings is in running buildings more efficiently. Techniques developed by the Pacific Northwest Northwest National Laboratory and being used and enhanced by my team at the CUNY Building Performance Laboratory. When applied, building-wide, reduced total building energy consumption 14% on average. These are no-cost and low-cost measures, effectively yielding a boundless return on investment. Okay. It's difficult to argue that turning things off when you don't need them or turning them down when you don't need them at full power has a lot of pizzazz. But given the implied research and training my team conducts, I'm convinced that these techniques will become widely adopted, not only in many New York City buildings, but on a global scale. This is the low fruit with high ROI that greatly reduces energy consumption with little effort. This approach will be used for the next 20 or 30 years in parallel with the burgeoning workforce that will retrofit our buildings to be inherently more efficient. And again, the creation of these jobs will be accelerated by the Clean Power Plan. In short, deciding to forego the Clean Power Plan is denying a large net increase in American jobs. These jobs are local jobs. That's because building retrofits and operations occur on-site, not overseas. And the same is true for accelerating the deployment of renewable energy plants. So, let's not talk about repealing the Clean Power Plan. Let's get on the right side of history. Let's enact the Clean Power Plan, and let's get to work. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Emily Marte, and I'm from Harlem, Washington Heights. I'm a member of We Act for Environmental Justice, and I'm also a student at George Washington University. And I would like to make a few points. The Clean Power Plan was supposed to be a critical piece of national policy. It's the only national policy that would essentially tackle the issue of greenhouse gas emissions from power plants responsible for climate crisis. In the past year, climate catastrophes have affected us globally in different forms. It has affected my family in the Caribbean, my family in Florida, and many other people. Weather has evidently increased in intensity, and this is science-based. If there is a policy like the Clean Power Plan that could lessen these climate change issues, we want to move forward with it and address the climate change issue. In a country as large as ours, having one public hearing in Charlottesville, West Virginia, on a matter of such importance to the United States, now and in our future, doesn't make sense to me. It's a shame that this administration is trying to curtail our rights as citizens to have our voices heard of these important policies. Lastly, why are we devaluing the work that has been done by researchers and professionals in a spectrum of fields like climate, environment, geology, health, economics, etc.? The point of their work is to help the government make informed decisions on matters like climate change. Climate change is an issue that affects us in different levels. If experts say we need to take action through programs like the Clean Power Plan that would help us use resources more sustainably, then we should adopt the plan. The plan made sense. It would address issues beyond climate, like environmental injustice, and the people want that. I want to thank the Attorney General for making this hearing possible, along with co-sponsors like We Act for Environmental Justice.
So I too want to open by thanking the Attorney General's office for their leadership on creating this people's hearing. I certainly, as a leader in an organization that is one of the co-sponsors, We Act for Environmental Justice, I'm really grateful that this day has actually happened. And I know that there are many other EJ organizations, both across the country and right here in New York City, that are also really grateful and have co-sponsored this event as well. And so I want to acknowledge their hard work. Now, that's not part of my time. In the United States, there are a higher percentage of communities of color and low-income communities living near power plants. In fact, there are many rural power plants that are located near small communities with high percentages of low-income populations. And in urban areas, nearby communities tend to be both low-income communities and communities of color. The EPA's Clean Power Plan, released in August of 2015, required that states reduce their carbon emissions from fossil fuel-fired power plants. It would have, if it were allowed to sort of come into full force and effect, been the first time that the EPA was requiring state regulators to actually adopt new CO2 emission levels and to demonstrate how they would meaningfully engage all stakeholders. And for us, that's very significant. Workers, low-income communities, communities of color, and indigenous populations, and people living near power plants are usually the last, if at all, to be engaged in the making of policy. But we saw this and we fought for the idea that this would be a really meaningful engagement for those types of communities as the Clean Power Plan, with its many flaws, like its cap and trade approach to dealing with carbon emissions reductions, was rolled out. They would also be required to both describe their engagement with their stakeholders and evaluate the effects of their plans on vulnerable communities and take steps necessary to ensure that all communities benefit from the implementation. Now, while I don't want to be completely full-throated in terms of my support for the Clean Power Plan, I do support it, I want to be clear, but it is a flawed approach to dealing with carbon emissions. That said, it is the only approach that we have nationally. And for the EPA Administrator Pruitt and the current administration of our 45th president to think that it's important for us to be repealing this in the wake of some of the climate disasters that have been happening just over this last year, it's ridiculous. That said, I want to offer 4 key points of how a Clean Power Plan could move forward and address some of the inequities and environmental injustices that might be reaped from actually going forth in its current structure and design. 1, as I said before, creating opportunities for high-impact engagement, making sure that EJ communities and key stakeholders in low-income communities near and living around clean power plants should be the business of all states as they develop their state implementation plan. And they should really look to take very seriously the full engagement process that many EJ advocates across this country, and particularly WEACT and my staff out of Washington, D.C., really help to push the EPA to actually craft. I think the results of high-impact engagement should result in a definite improvement in environmental conditions for those communities and some reductions in emissions and improvement in health overall. 2, conducting an environmental justice analysis is one of the key things that was put into the plan. We want to encourage states to move forward with developing those key areas for criteria for analysis for environmental justice, and to move forth as the Clean Power Plan encourages states to conduct their own analyses in taking into consideration communities and their needs in developing their plans. This is a really important part of the state implementation process and should be taken extremely seriously. The guidance puts forth, our guidance to how states could do this, puts forth a real way in which an EJ analysis should be conducted, and tools and resources are available to states if they need help for that. 3, consider other options to reduce emissions of CO2 without necessarily employing a cap and trade program. Now, obviously that rolls off the tongue quite easily, but it is not a simple undertaking. Other allowances, from the clean energy, such as the Clean Energy Incentive Program, should be really focused on. While the use of cap and trade program is not something that EJ communities support, it is definitely promoted by the Clean Power Plan as a primary option for compliance. This is a concern for many of those who live near polluting facilities. We support achieving emissions reductions without the use of cap and trade, and while data is still being gathered to quantify the potential localized increases in pollution in places like California and some of the northeastern states where current cap and trade systems exist, it is our hope that states strongly consider adopting other strategies for compliance and to build into their structure to prevent something to prevent the deterioration of air quality at the local community level if a trading mechanism is employed. And 3, building in continuous monitoring and evaluation processes in the final state plan that are always transparent to those, particularly in impacted communities, but all public, to track the quality and health outcomes in low-income communities and communities of color in particular. And 4, we really do need to commit additional resources to spur economic development and job growth in opportunities in impacted communities. The opportunities for training and job growth in the clean energy sector has been well documented by many people, as well as the deployment for energy efficiency and renewable energy. I think it's really important for overly impacted communities to see that these resources are put forth to help make sure that the rollout of a clean power plan in their communities actually does take into consideration opportunities for job growth. I know that I'm over time, and I just want to end again by offering thanks to the Attorney General's office and the New York City Mayor's office on sustainability and long-term planning. Anyone else I missed up there to DEC? Thank you.
Thank you. And with that, I want to formally conclude this hearing, with a few remarks. First, I think this hearing, and I think I can speak for my colleagues at the state as well, is that this was a tremendous signal to the federal government that climate change is real, that climate change is real, and that we need aggressive action on it. It's also it's an incredible validation of the environmental and climate movement that's gripping this country at the moment, but that the federal government continues to deny. The hearing in some ways doesn't stop here. We are taking your testimony. It will be transcribed and it will be submitted to the EPA. If you do have written copies, I encourage you to leave them at the registration desk. And I also encourage you to submit them online through the formal EPA channel as well. It doesn't hurt to make sure that they hear it twice. And while this hearing was directed primarily at federal action and the federal government and the Trump administration, I think it also, for local government officials and our state officials, I think it signaled to us, and so it validated our work, but also signaled that we have to move quicker. I think we have to double down on a lot of what we're doing and also continue in the vein that we have been in many other ways. I also finally just want to express a huge amount of gratitude to the New School. This is an institution that has been unafraid to open its doors for years to allow the public to speak truth to power. And I particularly want to thank Anthony Curry, Molly Kraft Johnson, Amy Maslin, and Scott. And Scott, I'm sorry if I got your last name. I don't have your last name here, but the AV technician, has been just a huge help here. So thank you all again, and particularly those that travel far and wide to be here. It was a real pleasure having you. And again, your voices don't stop here. They will continue on to DC into the EPA. Thank you very much.